And I think sometimes we as coaches, and I say the we in the royal sense of like as an athlete, we're always kind of putting a lot of value on that next level, that next step. And sometimes like what I have learned is that like I just really need to enjoy being right here, right now, like as a business owner too, right? We're doing some really cool things right now. And I'm trying to remind myself that like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I couldn't even have dreamt that I was doing what I'm doing today.
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of running and what helps people to achieve success, however they define it, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Freedom Solar Power. When I first started looking into solar, I thought it would be a clunky and expensive process. I've learned it isn't nearly as hard as you think. Freedom Solar Power makes it simple. They provide a turnkey solution that is focused on educating their customers on the experience from installation to everyday use and savings. They ensure you have all the information needed to make sure going solar is right for you. From firsthand experience, it makes sense both financially and for the environment. With no down payment required, solar not only adds immediate value to your home, but it's also great for the environment and might even provide immediate savings, not to mention the year-end tax benefits, a credit of 26% this year. Freedom Solar operates in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, and Florida, and there are plenty of other great options nationwide. This episode is brought to you by Goodr. Goodr has the slickest shades around for only $25 and $35. They don't slip or bounce, and they stay on my face way better than more expensive sunglasses do. If you'd like to support me and the show, treat yourself to a pair or two or three of Goodrs and head over to goodr.com and get 15% off your entire order with the code FTLR. That's 15% off at goodr.com, code FTLR. Your face will thank you. Thank you to Tracksmith for sponsoring this episode. Tracksmith just released their spring collection, and as a season shift yet again, I'm proud to continue this partnership with them. Tracksmith is a brand for committed runners like you and me, people who know that the best part of a busy day is squeezing in a workout. They offer products for training, racing, and rest days, which you know I'm a fan of, and create experiences that make running more rewarding, more connected, and more meaningful. Visit tracksmith.com/forthelongrun to see some of my favorite pieces, and all orders with the code FORTHELONGRUN, all one word, will receive free shipping, and 5% of your purchase amount will be donated to the Michael J. Fox Foundation to help find a cure and support those living with Parkinson's. Welcome back. I have Andrew Simmons joining me from just down the road in Golden. Is that correct?
Yeah, Golden Lakewood, if you want, not too far from each other.
Nice. Andrew, thanks for taking some time to chat today. First question is always a doozy. Who is Andrew?
Ooh, who is Andrew? Andrew is a runner and run coach. I'd like to consider myself someone that still gets out there and competes, as well as kind of being in it with my athletes. I think that's one of the most enjoyable parts of my job is that I don't have to remove myself from the equation. I get to get out there and be in it with my athletes.
Yeah, I think that having the perspective of like you're doing it yourself allows you to continue learning and continue evolving. We met down in Austin, Texas. You had raced the half marathon there on a beautiful day, little hilly course, and you had yourself a day. And then we had a chance to chat about it afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think that was a really cool experience for me as I was down there. Kind of on a personal mission. Originally it was a plan to be down there with my wife for her birthday, but our schedules kind of went like this. And so I was like, you don't often get to go and just race by yourself and kind of pursue that. Usually you're with a group. And so it was actually a really cool thing to get down there for and meet the whole Endeavorun crew. And as you know, see my buddy Foon and kind of connect with him and then meet all of you guys. And so I was like, oh, it feels like I'm down here with a group of people. And that was really special. That was a really cool, addition to my experience there.
Very cool. So let's back it up a few years. How did you get into running?
Oh man, how much time you got?
About an hour.
Yeah. So when I was in middle school and high school, I actually got into the sport of wrestling, and I promise it'll all come back full circle here. But I had hated running for the longest time. My actual first relationship with running was with my dad. My dad grew up in Boston, and so for him, he never ran the Boston Marathon legally. He would jump in about mile 3, mile 4, and kind of run across it and say, "Yeah, I ran most of the course. I don't need to do the actual thing." And he got me to try and do a 5K as conditioning for wrestling, and I hated it. I felt like 5K was the longest thing in the entire world. And what changed there for me is I tore my left quad in the junior year of high school, and that was kind of when I had that initial realization that I'm like, I'm not doing this in college. Like I'm not gonna wrestle in college. Like this seems like a pretty silly endeavor. And growing up in Michigan, I did a lot of work on the farm. We did this thing called corn detasseling. For those that are Midwest that are pumping their fists, like let's go. Corn detasseling was like the rite of passage in Michigan. It was kind of everybody's first job at 13 or 14. And I was like, man, I'm just gonna go work. What happened there is I went from being about 135 pounds to my sophomore year of engineering school and in college, weighed just about 225. So I'd grown to be a pretty big Midwest fella. And I was kind of like, man, I can't even keep up in a game of Frisbee. And my initial foray into running actually came a little bit by accident. I started in triathlon originally because there was a local race that I was like, man, Dad, I'm going to try and get back in shape. Can I borrow the bike? And like the bike that my dad was like, here, go for it, was just this jalopy. That's the best word I could use to describe it. And so I took it into the bike shop. And while I was waiting to pick it up, like a week later, I saw this flyer for the Sherman Lake YMCA sprint triathlon. And it was in like 6 weeks. I'm like, that's the one. That's the place for me. Like I can do this. I grew up swimming before wrestling. And so I was like, I know how to swim. Like I got the bikes fixed and I can figure out this whole running thing. And that's where it started. And since then I've 39 marathons, an Ironman, multiple half Ironmans in there, and countless halves, fulls, 10Ks. So for me, it's been kind of an entire exploration, like time trial, 6 hours on the bike, like kind of been a lot, but running really became the thing for me after my Ironman. Like I was like, I really love the running of all three sports the most.
What was it about the run?
I think the hardest thing is that I did my Ironman in 2011 and I graduated from college in 2010, and trying to work a full-time job and try to do, triathlon at a relatively high level, it was just too much. Trying to really truly have a career and grow and show a business that you're dedicated. You can't train at the same level as you could when you're in college and you have a little bit more free time. So for me, I was like, man, I can get a great workout in an hour, and I can empty the tank in an hour, and I can actually see some good results. I went from being like a 3 hour kind of marathoner to like really starting to chase. My PR is 239. So I really was able to kind of chase and really get my times down. And that was more motivating than taking a half an hour off my Ironman time for 4 times the work of another part-time job.
Yeah, it's wild. It's like you can run 10 hours a week, and that's a lot of running. Whereas if you're triathlon training, 10 hours is like, it's not even pedestrian. It's like, it's not enough to finish and feel okay.
And that's, I think, what got to me, as I was like, man, like, and I was significantly better at that sport. Like my run was definitely the strongest of my sports. And I'm like, I just love running. Like, and that's it for me, man, is that I can pursue so many different types of training. Like I love trail running. I love running on the roads. I love, racing track. Like I still get on the track and, race a mile. Like go run a hard mile. Like that is so wildly different than a marathon. And that's what I love, is that there's still some variety in the sport if you choose to find it. Whereas like triathlon, it's like you got 3 sports. You're either doing them for a very short amount of time, very long amount of time.
It's funny you say it that way. I was at Western States. My first experience at Western States was 2018. And I was just sort of like getting into the fascination of long distance running and like why you would do it. And this whole podcast has evolved basically because of that curiosity. Like, why would you choose to run 100 miles? And so I was asking people like who were going out to run for up to 30 hours in the next day to day and a half. And one guy said something that I'll never forget. He was like, at least it's not a 5K. I'm like, dude, you're about to run, 33 times the distance and you're saying at least it's not a 5K. He's like, yeah, that shit hurts. And so it's like it's a different perspective. Some people love the long and slow, and others, it's the fast burn that they're after. And it's so cool that you can like straddle both of those things in the same sport.
Yeah. I think for me it's like it's the pursuit, right? Like it's the chase that I enjoy, in the sport right now. And I think that's what also I really like about my job as a coach is like people come to me because they're pursuing something. They're chasing something. They have a dream. They have something that they want out of the experience. And I love that because I can put myself in those shoes because I'm still someone that's chasing down goals. Like I still have goals for myself. I still want to do that. I haven't resigned myself. A friend of ours that works with us on the youth side, he's like, his view is you're either a coach or you're an athlete, right? And that if you're coaching, you're no longer pursuing yourself as an athlete. You've kind of stepped aside, and maybe your goals are behind you, right? And you've resigned to that. And that's not where I want. I want to be like 75 and racing masters races because it's so fun to me. Like I think a lot of people view aging as a bad thing, and it's like, man, it changes, right? It's not bad or good. It's just it changes.
Totally. I was watching Ted Lasso yesterday, and
Great show, by the way.
great show. He said something that is similar to what you've said. He said, "Be curious, not judgmental." It's like that curiosity of how good can you get, or how far can you push. Personally, I want to run 100 miles one day or 1.5 days. Really, one day. Because I'm curious, like, what is that experience like? And I agree with you that you can coach and compete at the same time. And I think it makes for a better coach. I don't think it's essential, but I think it can make for a better coach because they're in it, right? They're like my day to
Yeah.
day.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that 100%, but I think there's a certain piece of this too that there's also a lot of value from the outside, even to the listener right now. Is like, what has Andrew done, right? And I feel like this is that dialogue that's in my brain when I look at other people. Like I've never made Team USA, I've never been to an Olympics. And I think sometimes like my view of myself is that, man, have I done anything that is of value enough, right? My view of myself, have I really done anything that's going to be of value to someone, or when they could choose, a prior Olympian or that, someone else that's accomplished, at the very top level of the sport. And I think one of the things I've seen people struggle with is that when they hire this person that's super top end of the sport, that person knows how to coach people that have experienced the same thing, right? Like they know to like, hey, I'm going to give you 20 by 400 because that was a workout that I could do, and I think you can handle this, where it's like, I've come up instead of like trying to bring myself down. And I feel like sometimes, I'm just as curious as you. Like, I don't want to do 100 miles right now, like at all, but I love coaching it. I mean, I've crewed for 200-mile races, 100-mile races. Like, I love to be in it. I love to, right? Like, I like to get my hands dirty. But do I want to do 100 miles yet? I think I still want to. I'm still at this phase where I feel like I can run pretty fast. And I feel like once I really start to see those times kind of trickle away from where I enjoy them, then I'm like, well, let's just go longer. Let's see what's there. But for right now, I love pursuing hard and fast track reps and, feeling it, all of it, all at once.
Totally. Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy there. Do you think there's a little imposter syndrome in what you talked about with the coach versus, I don't want to say credibility, but medal chasing?
Yeah. I think imposter syndrome is, man, it's at every level. I'm sure that if you talk to, you know, gosh, any coach that even coaches Olympians and things like that, there's probably still people that they're saying, well, there's this other level. And I think sometimes we as coaches, and I say the we in the royal sense of like as an athlete, we're always kind of putting a lot of value on that next level, that next step. And sometimes like what I have learned is that like I just really need to enjoy being right here, right now. Like as a business owner too, right? Like we're doing some really cool things right now. And I'm trying to remind myself that like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I couldn't even have dreamt that I was doing what I'm doing today, working with the people I'm working with and, going to national level races with our kids and seeing them, get scholarships to go to college and really pursuing it. Like that was way not on my list when I started. Like it's shifted, but like that's what's driving me now. And what I thought is that when I worked with my first person that, finished Boston or my first Olympic trials qualifier, like that's when I'm going to be valuable to somebody. When the reality is that the value is what I give people in conversation and advice and working through the process, right? Process in quotes with them.
It's fascinating. Like I've had this conversation with my coach, David Roche, and David coaches dozens of elite and professional athletes. He's coached athletes who have been to the Olympic trials and more. And he has the same thing. It's like, no, dude, like you have athletes that are competing at the highest level, yet there's still some of that imposter syndrome. And what I found to be fascinating from conversation on this podcast with people who have gone to the Olympics or they compete professionally for Bowerman or, whatever. These are high level athletes who are saying the same things, that they're struggling with imposter syndrome and these challenges that you wouldn't think that they would, right?
Yeah, you think that everybody has it figured out and that like it's always right, it's always perspective. Right? It's time is our greatest perspective that when we look in the rearview mirror, right? They always say that hindsight's 2020. It's like how do we have 2020 right now and just be happy with what's right here? And don't get me wrong, I'm saying this with a huge amount of like there are days that I just like am I doing this right? Am I doing this well enough? And I think we always we need a point of reference, and sometimes we choose to compare instead of looking at our own path. Right, like that highlight reel, for better or for worse, is the one that we're always comparing ourselves to because that's what social media really is we're looking at the highlight reel and we're saying, shoot, someone else did X, Y, or Z. Why didn't I do that? Or Strava or whatever, right? And it's just like, did I do better at this workout than the last time I did it? The last time, whatever I did, have I improved? Have I gotten better? And if not, then yeah, maybe I can be upset with it. But if I moved forward even a centimeter, that's progress. And I need to celebrate that and be excited about that.
Totally. So how do you get out of your own way in those instances?
I think a lot of it has been, I mean, my wife has been a huge help in that, right? My wife is my business partner. So that ultimately at the end of the day can be it can be tough, but also like she's the person that if I go and say, man, I'm having a rough day, or I can just, I get balance from her. And so to get out of my own way, sometimes I have to open up and admit to myself first that I'm getting in my own way. I think the first part of anything is realizing that you're struggling, that awareness, like even talking to my athletes that are dealing with negativity in a race or in a specific situation. The first thing I say is the first step is recognizing that you're having a bad day or that you're getting in your own way, right? You have to recognize it. And that's the powerful step number one. And you may have to just recognize you're having a bad day 10 times before you can start to take action, right? Action is always number two. So recognize I'm having a bad day. And sometimes you have to tell, like, I got to tell my wife, I'm having a total shit day today, right? Like, and then she can go, okay, what do you do about it? Right? Like, are you going to sit and mope about it? Sometimes you do sit and mope about it because you need to sit and mope about it and move forward. But sometimes you just need to talk through it. And that's the action. And so there's a lot of different ways, but that's the best way I've found is just recognize the fact that you're having a bad day, bad run, whatever it is. Go, yeah, it's a bad run today. And then, walk for a little bit and then you move on. And don't let it, create a total warpath behind you. Just be in the moment, cry, piss, moan, whatever it is, and then move on.
Makes sense. So switching gears to talk, well, I guess not really switching gears. Let's talk about you as a coach. How did that evolution go? I find the journey into coaching to be so wildly different for coaches. So I'm curious to hear about your experience.
Yeah. I mean, from the adult side, it was just, I hate to say it's a natural progression. At some point, I decided to, put myself out there and advertise myself as a coach, right? But I had just found that a lot of people in my community. So I grew up in a really cool community in Kalamazoo, and I moved away from that in 2013 to move out to Colorado. And I had a really cool coach, Rob Lilly, out of Kalamazoo, and he taught me a lot. But I never really saw myself as a coach in Kalamazoo. And it was only once I left that I realized that I was providing a lot of value to a lot of people just with general advice from experience. And that was the transition to say, well, maybe the value that I provide is more than just comments and thoughts and phone calls, but that's actually a structure that can provide value and make me some money, maybe. And then the reality is that I was getting really, really tired of corporate America. And I know that's a, kind of a trigger word for a lot of people, but for me, man, I had come out of a recession. So I graduated in 2010 and it was really hard to find a job. So I was super thankful to have one. But man, I got beat up and walked over and I just didn't feel like, that I was providing value there. And went and worked in a hospital in a healthcare environment. And, that was even worse. I thought it couldn't get any worse than the auto industry in Detroit in 2010. And turns out it does. And, so I was like, man, okay. And moved to insurance. And that's when I moved out to Colorado. And, that business basically went from being owned by one company to another. And I had a conversation with HR that says, hey, do you want to interview for your own job? Like we're restructuring and we're going to retitle you. And I'm like, no, I don't. I'm going to take a severance package. And I took my 90 days. I went and worked on a farm in Longmont and I split my other time working at a bike shop in Golden. Just because I was like, do I want to, what path do I want to take? And at the time, my wife, we'd only been living in Colorado for like a year and a half. I'm like, man, this is tough. And I was kind of pushed up against the wall of like, what do I do here? Do I actually provide enough value as a coach to kind of pursue this? And I said, let's see what happens. I've got 90 days where I'm making my salary. We're either going to make it or we're going to break it. And we made it. We ended up making enough, and Katie stayed in corporate for just kind of long enough until she got so busy doing personal training and coaching. And then it kind of spiraled out to there. Now we've got staff and two different programs. And yeah, I got my foray into youth coaching is actually a super cool story with Melody Fairchild, but maybe that's another day.
Well, I want to hear about that as well, but I'm so curious about it's like a movie, right? You have 90 days to figure it out. So day one, what did you do?
Well, I had been training up in Boulder under Brad Hudson with like Addie Bracy and a number of other girls at the time. And I actually ended up going to what's now called the Purple Door Market in Hygiene. That was kind of like a midway stop for a ton of my runs, like in 20 milers and things like that. And I'd walked in there and I was eating after, just kind of refueling. And I'd ended up meeting the owner. And at the time, the owners had just switched and they had owned a farm out in Longmont. And that was literally like my first day that I took my severance. That was Sunday. I did that long run and then they were like, hey, do you want to like come work on this farm? And so literally I just like drove my truck up to Longmont like Thursday of that week. And I had talked with Scott. I'd been in there with my wife quite a bit at the bike shop at Big Ring in Golden. And I was like, he's like, hey, I need someone part-time. And I'm like, oh, I'm not working right now. Like, let's figure this out. And so Thursday I went and worked on the farm. Friday I went and worked at the bike shop, just tuning bikes and slinging bikes to people. And it was just like every other day. One day in Longmont, one day at the bike shop. And I was just kind of like freelancing in many different ways of it, is trying to also start my own business. I've never run a business before in my life. Like it was just figure it out. And that is what our approach has been since day one is, well, we're presented with a problem, figure it out, find a way.
Love that. Okay, so day 45, how are things going?
Yeah. So within this, I'm laughing because at the time it was the most stressful thing I dealt with. The farm owner was like, hey, we're going to go on a 2-week trip to Italy. Can you handle the farm? And I'm like, yeah, for sure. I totally got this because I've never run a farm in my whole life. And like, we've got crops that are growing. We've got a greenhouse to manage. And this is a 10-acre farm. It's not huge. But At the same time, we'd also been hit with a massive drought here in Colorado. And so he was like, "Hey, I need you to irrigate like every 3 days." And I'm like, "Got it." And he's like, "And if you have a chance, can you figure out how to get the pump working for the irrigation system? I haven't figured that out yet." So, like, I have no way to water the farm. And so literally at one point I was like, okay, I got the tractor. I've got like, I don't know, 100-gallon, like one of those big cubes that's got a spigot on it. At one point I was literally every other day filled used the pump to fill the big thing and driving up and down the lanes trying to water garlic with just the back of this spigot open. And I'm sitting there going, this guy gave me nothing. Like I have no tools to work with. And of course, right, my mentality, just figure it out, just figure it out. And I came back and the guy was like, and I'd done a ton of work, right? Like I'd kept the greenhouse going, everything's alive. And he comes back to me, he's like, "Hey, I'm a little disappointed." And I'm like thinking like I shouldn't have driven in the field and I compacted the soil or something. He's like, "The garlic had a lot of weeds in it." And I'm like, "Dude, what? Like your farm is still standing and we just had like 11 straight days without rain. Like your garlic's growing. It's not wilted and dying, but the weeds." And so I was like, "Okay, I don't think I can it's not that I can't work with other people's expectations. It's just that I'm like, that's what you're upset about?" Like there was no like, "Hey, thanks for doing this." Like it was, "Oh, there's some weeds in the garlic." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So it's that didn't go so well. So once kind of summer had finished up and we're headed into fall, we pulled the garlic and he's like, "Hey, I think we're going to go a different direction kind of for our winter crop planting. I don't need as much hands on the field." So I was like, "That's cool." Ended up going on to do some work at the bike shop. And I had stayed there until things got slow after Christmas. And then I'd had just barely enough going on that kind of in that false spectrum of things, I got a call from Melody Fairchild. So I'll imbibe you that story very quickly here. She called me and said, "Hey, I got a call from somebody in Golden that's looking for a youth coach for they have like a team of 5." And this was originally coached by Anthony Kunkel before he moved down to Durango. And I was like, "Yeah, I'll take the phone call." And that spiraled from me working with 5 kids to now peak is over 100 kids in season. We coach ages 8 to 18. I've got a really awesome like Nancy. She's a former school teacher. She's retired now, and I use that in air quotes because she shows up rain, snow, sleet, whatever, and she'll coach 1 kid or 30 kids. And she's awesome. But like to work with those people, like it literally started from a phone call from Melody Fairchild, and it was like, you should get this youth coaching thing. I think you'd be good at it. And someone believed in me, and again, figured it out. And it's been super fun. I love working with kids.
Thanks again to Freedom Solar Power for supporting this episode of the podcast and our environment by providing an easy, green energy source. The buying process was fascinating and eye-opening, and I'm excited to pay my learnings forward. If you're curious about going solar in your home, message me on Twitter or Instagram, and I'd be happy to help your journey by providing some great resources. Freedom Solar is a full-service solar company that's been installing solar panels and backup power systems since 2007. They operate in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, and Florida. Not in any of those states? Don't fret, my parents have the same panels from SunPower that were installed by a different company in Massachusetts. SunPower is the best in the business, and that's what Freedom Solar uses. I've enjoyed working with the whole team over at Freedom Solar, and I'm sure you will too. Thanks again to Tracksmith for supporting the podcast. I'm proud to partner with Tracksmith, and they're going to donate 5% of your order value to the Michael J. Fox Foundation for all orders, and you'll also get free shipping. The Michael J. Fox Foundation is dedicated to finding a cure and helping those living with Parkinson's. Both of my grandfathers have or had Parkinson's, and I'm grateful for Tracksmith's support for something so personal. Visit tracksmith.com/forthelongrun to see some of my favorite pieces, and all orders with the code FORTHELONGRUN will contribute towards this donation. I have been loving their Harrier long sleeve and Alston half tights in particular. What are the biggest surprises in working with kids?
I mean, it's just it changes day to day. I mean, the surprises of working with kids, like you never know what's going to come out of their mouth. At some point, some kid tells their best story, by accident. And you're like, "Oh, that's okay." or you have a kid that like just comes and they don't have a huge value of themselves yet, right? We're growing. And it's the first day that they realize that they're capable of something. And they go, Coach, I think I can break 6 minutes in the mile. And this just happened for me. I had a girl who's chasing the 6 minute mile barrier since the last track season. And she came and did our preseason meets in February, 6:03 and 6:01. And I'm like, Allie, we're so close, girl. And I got a text message like 30 seconds after on Monday. And she's like, Coach, I did it. And dude, that's right there. That right there is why I coach, because that kid has been chasing that and she never gave up. And so for me, like, I just get a lot of joy out of a kid that is willing to put in a year's worth of work for 3 seconds.
How do you help them instill that self belief and that self confidence, right? That's the core of coaching. Back to Ted Lasso, like you can take someone who doesn't actually know the sport, and if you can coach the human and you can make the human believe in themselves, they can do anything.
I mean, Ted's the man. I mean, Ted is like he could be quoted for just about every passage of life. Of I think a lot of it is just giving the kids the reins. I think so often, right? Kids have teachers in front of them so often, and it's, hey, you have to follow this path this way. This is how we solve math problems. This is the history that you need to learn. This is how we program computers. And what I try to do when I coach kids is I say, go try this. And failure is the best teacher that I have, because I tell kids to go out and try and say, hey, what do you think you want to try and do today? How do you want to pace this? Instead of me saying, here's how you pace this. It's me giving it up to them and saying, what's your strategy with this? And then we have reflection after it. Instead of being told what to do, it's more of like, I'm going to give you, here's all the tools. Do you want to engage me and ask my opinion? Awesome, let's do that. But I also don't think that I have all the answers. I have learned way more in just listening and asking than ever teaching and commanding. Like I've told my wife on my gravestone, I want the words, from a coach's perspective at least, is that coaching is a dialogue, not a dictatorship. And that's what it is, that I have to sit there and it's a conversation. It's not do this or, it's what do you think and really it's about like letting them share, because there have been way better things that have gone, like races that have gone way better because that kid believes in that plan. Do I always think that that plan's going to work out? No, it could be awful. It could be a really bad plan, but bad plans executed violently sometimes work really well. And so sometimes you have to do that and then reflect at the kid and say, do you realize you just did that because you were angry? Yeah. Okay. So what actually did we do well there? And how do we tap into that? Or like, okay, you did that. How do we do that again? And really it's about giving them the reins. I think kids, adults, it doesn't really matter, is that if they believe that they're the ones that came up with that plan, or you position it so that they come to the realization themselves, way more power than being told the same message 30 times in a row and hoping it clicks, because I'm going to get frustrated.
Totally. That makes sense. I want to go back to something you just said. Failure is the greatest teacher. Talking about an experience where you quote unquote failed, but grew from it.
Again, how much time you got? We've made a lot of failures over the years, and I think a lot of it has been this assumption. Man, I think about trying to build community online has been one of our biggest places of failure as a business. It's been really hard for us to get that engagement, because we've tried to outthink the customer, in a sense, is that as we look at trying to grow an online business with online coaching, we assumed that people would want community. And we spent 4 years trying to build community and engage people in groups and things. But man, I'll be honest, John, you know what works really well? It's just talking to people. It's just developing those one-on-one relationships and kind of realizing that that's what I'm good at. And I wanted to think that we could build an amazing community, which we have. We have an amazing community. But I was under this assumption that that's what was attractive and that's what was good. Because when you look at the online coaching model, it's a wildly, when you look at the biggest groups out there, it's hundreds or thousands of engaged people that have had an experience with a coach. And that's not my lane. And that took me a long time to realize that my best work as a coach is when I'm having these one-on-one conversations, when I'm here talking with somebody and just asking better questions. I have to ask very broad questions in a Facebook group or in a, online forum. But I can ask you like, hey, do you think it's because you're, having a really rough time at work lately? Right. And it's just a question that nobody's going to answer online. Right. It's a little too deep. It's a little too uncomfortable. That's what the magic is.
Very cool. Definitely agree. It's cool when you can find that sort of secret sauce or that piece that you bring to the world. That that's your niche. Um, Continuing on the topic of conversations, you've got a pretty sweet mic there, and you've got your own podcast. So let's talk about that. How did that start?
Yeah. So the podcast is Defining Endurance. So the Defining Endurance podcast from Lifelong Endurance, which Lifelong Endurance is our adult coaching company. Peak Performance Running is our youth coaching program out here in Colorado. Defining Endurance really kind of started, we were just like, man, we have a lot that we want to say. And I think one of the things is as a coach and as a coaching program and a team of coaches is we end up saying a lot of the same things to a lot of the same people. What if we just shared that message with the world, right? And if people choose to listen to it and engage with it, then maybe, just maybe, I won't have to, talk about why we have to run easy on our easy days, until I'm like blue in the face. But I realize that I'm going to repeat myself a lot with people because they need to understand it from a value perspective. And that there are some situations where I'm like, oh, I'm going to send you this podcast. You'll get it. And other times I just have to have the conversation. But it started out of this desire to create something that helps solve a problem. And that's what Defining Endurance has been, is talking with athletes, just like for the long run, man, is that you're talking about people and people can walk away and say, oh, that hit me and resonated with me. And there may be 5 episodes in a row where nothing resonates with them, but then they hit an episode and it's like, that's me. And that one, and that's the one that they share. And like, this is the message I needed to hear.
I love that. It's similar to the podcast that my coach and his wife put out, Summer Call Play podcast, where the number of times I've texted David, I've been like, dude, are you talking to me again? It's like
Right.
it's like what I've written in the log is the question that's being addressed, and whether it's actually my question or concern, or it's the fact that 25 people have had the same problem. I had never thought about it that way. It's like, this is how to connect, and this is like a more scalable way to address these common hurdles or roadblocks.
Yeah, because it's like, I've tried so many different ways where I'm like, I know someone needs to hear this way and take the time to explain. I sat down yesterday and I put together a solo episode about, how do we actually build fatigue from a biology and, physiology way, like talking about the Krebs cycle and ATP and getting really super nerdy about it. My background is in engineering. I love to dive deep on things and explain the granular details. Because I know someone out there is like, hey, so why do my legs get tired when I sprint? Why can't I just sprint forever? Why does that actually happen? And like right, the imposter syndrome originally as a coach would have been, because you get tired, and like I wouldn't have a good answer for it. And so it's when I presented with questions that I struggle with, one, I have to be willing as a coach to say, I don't know. Let me get back to you. Like those are the best words I've heard even from my own coach. It's like, hey, I don't have an answer to this right now. Let me get back to you. But also like, this is something that I want to put out there because I know someone's going to ask me this and I don't have time to explain glycolysis in detail over a phone call. So here, I'm going to send you this podcast because I think you'll get a lot of value out of it.
That's super smart. I should start categorizing my podcasts with the the specialties of each guest. Yeah, I love that. That's a great idea.
No, I've enjoyed it. I think since we met, like I've been digesting a lot of your podcast, and I think to kind of switch it on you, is that was your intention, right? I'm going to ask you. I'm going to be podcast host for a second. You're not second fiddle. When it came down to it, like for you to start a podcast, was the intention to always talk with athletes at the highest level in the sport, or was it just to start a conversation out of curiosity?
So it's a great question. Initially, it was mostly to focus on elite athletes and understand what are the takeaways that an amateur can have from a professional athlete. But then I started interviewing some of my friends. The first conversation I ever had was with my friend Sarah Duffy, who's been chasing an OTQ in the marathon for quite a while. And I was like, the takeaways from even that was the first podcast I ever recorded. I didn't know what I was doing, and I learned a lot from her. And when we were in Austin for Endeavorun, Peter Bromka, who has been on the podcast as well, he talked about how oftentimes elites and pro athletes are pretty boring, and they hit the genetics lottery, and they're really good at being consistent. I don't think that's categorically true, but um, it just because you're fast, it doesn't mean you're interesting. Is the point that he's making? And he's like, show me an athlete who's been chasing a barrier for years and who hits it finally, and I'll show you an athlete who's interesting. Personally, I chased the sub 3 hour marathon for I don't know 4 years, and the process of doing that and the learnings from doing that, like those are the explorations that I want to have on this podcast. I just find that when an Olympic gold medalist is the one doing the teaching or the talking, like there's a bit of earned credibility and halo effect of like, if this person's saying it, then I should probably listen. And so my mix is intentionally about 75-25 in terms of pro and amateur. And I also include a lot of like business owners and people who I find to be successful in entrepreneurship, because I think the entrepreneurial journey is very similar to the endurance journey, right? You cannot build a company in one day. You cannot build fitness in one day. To be successful in business, you have to be good for a long period of time. To be successful in running, you have to be good for a long period of time. You don't have to be great at either. You just have to be good. And so I find a ton of parallels. I've had the founders of Beam on. I've had Pat Lemieux, Gwen Jorgensen's husband, who's super successful. She's a super successful athlete. He's a super successful sports agent. And these are the people that I find to be the most interesting and the people that we all have the most opportunity to learn from. Kevin Rutherford, CEO of Noon. I mean, he asked me, why do I do this? And I told him, I was like, Kevin, we just spoke for an hour, and I'm going to change how I live today and how I engage with my coworkers and how I engage with my own relationship with sport because of what you just shared. And, you know, he's a amateur triathlete, marathoner, et cetera, but he's also built this really successful company and is really good at building culture. And so the overlap is so fantastic, and you don't need to be elite to be interesting.
No, and I think that's like, I just hope that to my youth kids that I'm motivating by still going out there and chasing something, right? Because those kids are always chasing something. Like for a lot of the kids, right? Like they might run in college. Most of them won't. They just want to love the sport and chase their next PR or chase their next thing. And I think that's what's motivating even for me is like, man, there's kids are out here. Like I'm asking them to come out when it's snowing, sideways, it's 20 degrees, and they show up with a smile on their face because one, it's fun, but also like they love the pursuit of it. And I think whether it's a podcast or it's the work that you do, at the end of the day, like we just want to have an impact. It's such a human desire to have an impact. And whether that's, I'm sure it's the same way that when someone reposts your podcast, still, no matter how successful you've become in the podcast world, it still feels good. It still feels good when someone reposts an episode because that was impactful to them. There was a message there that hit. And I think that's the thing is that I know that the day that, a kid PRs and I stop feeling excited about that for them and that individual, that's probably the day I should quit coaching, because that's when I've lost something in there, right? Like, and I don't think I'll ever get there. I don't think I'll ever hit a point where I'm not excited when someone breaks through that barrier. I mean, even for me, right? Like the undertone of Austin, whether you knew it or not, was like that was 3.5 years in the making. Like for me to go and try and break 80 minutes in the half again, that was overcoming a stress fracture a month before I got married, to fracturing my navicular and my other foot a year and a half later, and really just not feeling like I was anywhere close to my fitness potential for almost 4 years. And so for me to even just cross the finish line feeling healthy, like that was my win. Like, and to do it at a time that was, it's still 7 minutes for my best half. But for me, that 80-minute barrier was the best start. And I didn't hit 80 minutes. But you know what? Like, I'm so proud of who I was and who I had to become to get back to that 80-minute place. And I think a lot of me along the way there didn't allow myself, at least initially, to be proud of myself. I think sometimes we as coaches put ourselves in the back seat and say, it's everything for the athlete, it's everything for the athlete. And then you leave yourself behind and you go, crap, I left some years out there that I wish I would have continued to chase my dream. And what I realized is that my kids were really motivated. Like, the number of kids that texted me and athletes that texted me the night before, like, my phone is blowing up. They were excited to watch me go and chase this thing and go, oh yeah, I can be in this too. I can play along, and they also get to feel like they're a part of something too. And I've always been the person that, puts a lot on the back burner for my athletes and my kids and my adults to make sure it happens for them. But now that I put myself first, I can have my cake and eat it too. It's pretty damn cool.
I love that. I ran past a fence today that said, "You are the light. Turn on your switch. Shine." It feels a lot like what you just said there, and it's like the reminder that you have a lot of people in your corner, and the opportunity is to bring them along for the ride. And yeah, completely agree. Along those lines, I'm curious. You asked when we first coordinated this, like, what are we going to talk about? I was like, I don't know, but here are some categories of things we talk about. One of them is success, and so you've sort of alluded to being successful in the Austin experience, right? You didn't hit your time
Yeah.
goal, but you were proud of yourself. I'm
Yeah.
curious your definition of success, and is it in line with pride and shooting your shot and this kind of stuff?
Yeah. I mean, success has a lot of flavors. I think a lot of people, I look at it as a gradient, right? Like, success and the process is huge to me. Because we talk about contrast, right? I think a lot of people that if they hit it, that's success. If they don't, everything else is failure, right? Like, it's either black or white. And that has been one of the biggest things I've struggled with as a coach, is that it's not black or white to me, right? Like, success is on a spectrum. And, one, showing up for me, success. Like, getting to the race healthy, successful, right? Being positive mentally throughout the entire race, successful. Being able to go and get up with another athlete who is trying to chase down a PR for herself, that gave me a mission. And like, she hit her PR. Was not at all on my radar before I entered the race, but like my internal coach took over, and I'm like, I want to see you do this, and we're gonna do this together. I feel great doing this, and it actually took my mind off of like how much discomfort I was in, right? Like, so again, like, I executed really close to my pacing plan. Like, I was 33 seconds off or whatever. And I'm like, man, I'm not going to, I could have gone under. Sure. I had to stop, use the bathroom once, tie my shoes twice. And I didn't let that get me down. I didn't let being 15 seconds off at the halfway mark beat me up. That was a mental win. So like, success is on a spectrum, but also success, or how we view it, to me, it's the shading of the picture, right? That's what gives it depth. That's what gives it this ability to pop off the page and say, this was my race experience. But if we only ever look at things as black and white, we're going to get very frustrated when we don't hit it every time we go out in training or every time we go out in race. If we don't hit it, you're going to hate the sport really quickly.
I totally agree. It's the reframing of points on the board, checking the box, having fun while you're doing so, versus like, this is a test. You must complete the test. I think that's been the like pivot or unlocking of what's possible for me that I've really only understood since the start of the pandemic. I think 2021 was helpful in that pursuit for me personally. Well, I appreciate your time today. I'm excited to dive in on the other side of things on your podcast. So for those who are listening after mid-April of 2022, check out Andrew's podcast. Well, check out Andrew's podcast in general, but our episode together as well. So Andrew, thanks so much for taking some time to chat, and we'll definitely see you out there soon.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. This was super fun, and hopefully we'll get a chance to maybe be on an episode here again.
Sounds good. That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too. This podcast and the accompanying music has been produced by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound. For the Long Run's logo was created by Vanessa Wolf of Sterling Wolf. Show notes have been written by Ruby Wiles and is managed by Emily Holland. It takes a village.